Susie,
Rob,
how often do you get asked about how to apply for a PhD?
956,000 times a week. How about you?
Not as many as that, I think. I think your profile might mean that you get asked that question more often. I mean, it's also possible that you've got a lot of people that want to do dinosaurs, but it's a
It's also
relevant question.
possible. It's also possible, Rob, that I am a tiny bit prone to exaggeration, just a tiny bit.
That's I wouldn't say that ever. No, never. The reason it's an important question is because it is a sort of mysterious process, and it is a fundamental part of becoming a paleontologist, right? It's perhaps the route into becoming a
Yes.
paleontologist. And in this next episode, we were going to try and continue our bonus episode where we talked about how to become a paleontologist, where we talked about the undergraduate experience and master's experience, and now we're going to move on to the next step. Are you ready to become a PhD?
I am.
So we've already had the first in our series of how to become a paleontologist in our bonus Patreon episodes. You can go back and find it. But we talked about the early part of that experience. What it was like for Susie and I. We had our different routes to becoming a paleontologist and the sorts of choices that you might make as an undergraduate or a master's student. But we wanted to talk about the next bit, how to do a PhD, which is actually, in some sense, is the most baffling. I mean, it is a complex process and it varies from place to place. I mean, is it baffling?
It is baffling. I think one of the difficulties about it is that it's different in every country. But not
Yes.
only that, actually, I mean, within the UK, it's different
Yes.
within every institution, and it's also different depending on the funder as
Mm-hmm.
well, isn't it? So who's funding the PhD
Mm-hmm.
affects how you might apply for it. So it is a completely baffling process,
Yeah.
and quite difficult to understand if you are not from, if you don't already know the system, if you're not already embedded in the system. I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So obviously, there's no one answer to this, but I think that's one of the reasons our motivations of doing this is to try and dispel some of those myths and make it more accessible, I guess, and maybe give you a thought about how to do it. I guess that's the other thing. When I guess I'm from a fairly not. I wouldn't say I was from a challenged background, but I nevertheless didn't even know what a PhD was. So
Mm.
knowing how to apply for one was a complete mystery to me because I wasn't part of that circle or what it was about. So that's the motivation to do that. Obviously, what Susie and I are talking about is probably going to be focused on more on the UK than other places, but we'll try and weave in our experiences in other places where we can. Europe and America mainly. If you want to know about how to apply for a PhD in China or Japan, I may offer you no information whatsoever. Well, that's not entirely true. I did act as an external examiner in Japan once. Have you done
Okay.
external examining anywhere outside of Europe or
Uh,
America?
no, I only in France actually is my only experience outside
Yeah,
of the UK. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's have a think then. What is a PhD first of all? I mean that. So you get a doctorate at the end of it. How
Well,
would you
actually,
describe what a PhD is?
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm not even sure a PhD is the same depending on where you come from. So I think I would say
Yeah,
that American PhDs are quite different from our PhDs as well. And
they
also
are. Yes.
the entry path into them is quite
Yeah.
different, isn't it? But certainly in the UK and generally in Europe and also perhaps in Canada, I think we all have a equivalent length PhDs of maybe 4 years
Mm-hmm.
these days. Back in our day, it used to be more common to have 3 years in the UK, but that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
gone to 4 years now, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really, what it is, I always think of it as it's like a kind of you're doing an extended research project, which when you pass it, I think it really it like it's almost a tick box exercise actually. That
Mm-hmm.
passing your PhD, ideally, it demonstrates that you have a set of skills and the academic ability
Mm-hmm.
to go on and really learn how to be a researcher. So I'm a bit people I think some people, and I think this is maybe where the US and UK differ a little bit, is I don't think you come out of a PhD as a fully fledged researcher. I think you come out of the PhD as somebody who has the intellectual ability to go on to learn to be a researcher.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with that.
Oh, good.
So a PhD in one sense is a sort of package of research that you deliver at the end of it that's evaluated by your peers to say yes you have or haven't got the quality to do that, but it's also about the process of doing it and the skills that you gain along it. So it's a training program, really, is the
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And then after that point, you are sort of qualified to be a
Well, just
paleontologist
to
or a
start to learn
biochemist
to do
or whatever you
research.
want to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
indeed, yeah. Or even a philosopher, right? A philosopher it was, I guess, a doctorate of philosophy, right? Or if you're at the University of Oxford, if you want to call it a DPhil, well, why have to do with those things?
Doesn't
Anyway,
matter.
that's what doesn't matter.
Doesn't
But it's the
matter.
same thing in America, in the US, in Canada, in Japan. You publish a you get together a book, which is the old-fashioned way of doing it, a packet of work that demonstrates that you have the curiosity and skills to do research. So this is often the stepping stone for you to become that. If you want to become a paleontologist, then 99% of the time that will require you to go and do a doctorate and think about where and how you're going to do that. How would you... Times have changed, right? The way I might have found a PhD program was very different to then than it is to now. What advice would you give to people to go where to find the appropriate range of PhD programs and get in contact with programs and supervisors?
Well, I think there are, well, obviously the interweb, but I think there's some resources that are available. I think professional societies are a really good place to start.
Absolutely.
So in the UK and Europe, we have the Paleontological Association, and they have a website where supervisors can choose to upload their projects that they might be advertising. And quite a lot of people do choose to do that. So that's always a good place to look. I'm sure that other paleontological associations also, societies also do the same. I don't know off the top of my head. I can't think of that SVP do, but I bet that something like the PalSoc in the US might do. There's also, just social media in general is really good. So, quite a lot of people will put job opportunities and PhDs and things like that on Blue Sky and on LinkedIn. They are, I would say, probably the main. I don't know whether does anyone ever advertise a PhDs on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram. I don't know.
The Fossil Files is on Instagram, and after they've joined that a bit, but I haven't seen people advertising jobs so much on there. But yes, I in my notes you've already said all the things I was going to say about professional societies is a good one, but also social media, and Blue Sky is the one where it used to be Twitter, it used to be the place that academics would hang out and post their opportunities. So but they very much migrated into Blue Sky, and once you start following certain academics, you'll find the other academics. They sort of flock together, and often that's one of the most shared things on social media is PhD programs and job opportunities.
I have to say though, Rob, LinkedIn, despite the fact that I absolutely hate it, because I'm never grateful or honoured enough to be writing any posts on there. It is becoming increasingly, I think, a place where academics are posting things like that, and there is, a lot of visibility there as well. So I think LinkedIn's a good place to look as well, despite the fact that personally it insults me in every way.
So one of the things to do is link out to the people that are in your network already. So if you're working as an undergraduate, think about ask your supervisor for advice, or join some societies, or I've written down here internships or summer schools. That's a big thing in America, right? If you go on a dig or whatever, or volunteer for a dig, beware of the predatory ones where you've got to pay money to go and do these things. But that might put you in
sometimes that's okay. If you want to do that, it's fine. Yeah.
But it might put you in contact with a broader community of people, I guess. Internships is another way to do that. Okay. So let's assume now that we're now actively looking for the other thing to point out is these things are very seasonal.
Yeah.
In the US, it's very seasonal. In Europe, I'm less sure on because they'll change from country to country. But in the UK, the big season for this is December and January and February. That's when these programs are open and closing.
I would say even earlier than that, actually. The PhD funding programs that we're involved with here will be closed at the end of January. So I would say start looking in November, probably.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good point. And I would say if you're in the UK, the Paleontological Association website is absolutely essential, which is what Susie mentioned, because they can list all these projects on there. I always make sure I put my PhD projects on there. Okay, so things to consider. I would suggest the number one thing to consider is the project. Or would you say it's the supervisor? Which one's going to be more important for you?
I think that's quite a personal thing. I think there's a whole can of worms here. I think that the projects can be quite specific. I think you don't want to get stuck doing something that you really, really, really don't want to do. So, like, if you absolutely hate being outdoors, don't apply for a PhD project that involves 6 weeks of fieldwork every summer. Things like that. I would say common sense, but probably I wouldn't be too focused on a particular. So, like, I know you like T-Rex. I do. I know you like T-Rex a lot, but maybe
just to be clear, you're not talking to me specifically. This is...
I know you don't like T-Rex, right? I'm just trying to say, like, I think be a little bit flexible, right? And what you think you might want might not be don't try to be too. You're never going to get somewhere if you are going to be very too narrow. So
I think that's right.
I do think the supervisor is really, really, really important. Though. I mean,
I think this is also going to change a lot depending on where you're doing this, right?
yeah,
In the US, you get time to sort of develop your program and work very much in a sort of broad area.
yeah,
Rather than in the UK, you might be given a specific uh, project, like you were going to do this. But even on those specific cases, you often have the opportunity to develop it in a direction you want to. Although, if I appoint someone to do a project on fossil fish and they end up getting obsessed with T-Rex, I'm not going to be impressed, I guess.
no.
But
I mean,
uh,
there's some latitude, but ultimately the
yeah,
project is predefined.
yes, absolutely.
I but I mean, without going into too much detail on this because it is complex and difficult to talk about, really. I think whether it's important to find out about the supervisor before you start. And
Yes.
there are many, many, many lovely, brilliant, excellent, superb
Hmm.
supervisors in paleontology,
Hmm.
but sometimes there aren't as well. There are some who aren't. So
Mm.
it is really a good idea, and I know a lot of people do this already, is to have a chat
Yes.
maybe with so I actually always recommend if people want to come and work with me, I tell them to go and talk to my students, but
Absolutely. Same.
talk to their students already, talk to maybe some people who already know them.
Hmm.
You can do this in a totally off the record way. Don't
Hmm.
do it over email, for example, but like, and just find out if there's anything that you should be aware of before you start.
Yeah. Reaching out to recently graduated members of that lab, not necessarily it doesn't have to be with that direct supervisor. If it's someone else at that same institution, they should have some opinions. And I think that's really powerful for you to get an idea about whether there are
And it's
problematic
not
supervisors out there.
about gossip, it's not
No.
about gossip, and it's not about, but it is. But doing a PhD is incredibly it can be a really, really, really tough process, right? And a lot of
Hmm.
people suffer with their mental health during the course of
Hmm.
it, and you need to make sure that you're going to be with a supervisor who's able to support you in whatever way that might be.
Hmm.
And different supervisors are going to work for different people, and I think both of us can say that we've probably had students who we've got on really well with, and then students that maybe we've gotten a bit less well with, and they would probably
Hmm.
say the same about us. I'm sure they would.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it you have to, I think it's worth asking, and just finding out that what other people's opinions was.
Absolutely. And actually, that really boils down to a point that I was going to bring up next, was about motivation. Well, there's two questions here. One is about motivation and one is about funding, but they're kind of interrelated. So, motivation. I think before anyone wants to go and do a PhD, one of the things I often have these conversations with people where they are not sure or unsure about whether they want to or not, is that it is a big commitment. You're giving up 4 years of your life to this. It can't be something that you want to do on a whim. A bad motivation to do it is, oh, I quite liked my undergraduate studies and I just want to keep going, or I enjoyed my experience at university and I don't really want to leave. That's a terrible, terrible reason to do it. And it's also completely unlike being an undergraduate, right? You're going to be working independently. You're going to have to keep the person keeping it going will be you, not the supervisor. It's not your supervisor's job to get a whip and keep you going, although that is part of it. The primary person to keep it going is going to be you. And if you can't work independently through complex problems and keep that motivation up for 4 years, don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some people who are more suited from a personality point of view to getting through this and
Hmm.
coping through this.
Hmm.
Another thing I would say was, if you're a perfectionist, have a really hard think about whether you're going to be able to do it. I mean, seriously,
I'm
because I
already
know.
now running through names of people that I know. Actually,
But
thinking that I should have entered that, but
it's a thing that requires you to be able to finish work,
yes,
draw a line yourself, and
yeah,
say, this is enough, this is good
yeah,
enough,
yes,
right? And
yeah,
it's that old thing that the last 10% of the work, the last finishing of that 10% is
hmm,
90%
hmm,
of the time. And so
absolutely,
sometimes it's not worth doing that last 10%. You
yeah,
just have to draw that line and get rid of it. And I think a lot of the time when people struggle with their PhDs and when they are having mental health issues surrounding their PhDs, it's a lot to do with this inability, or that they haven't done it early enough to actually just go,
hmm,
this phase of the PhD is done, I need to stop this now and I need to move on to something else. And that
yeah,
ability to sort of manage your own time, to be strict with yourself, and to recognize that nothing's ever perfect and that nothing
hmm,
is ever going to be perfect. is really, really important. And if you're not someone who can do that, think really hard about whether this is the right course of action for you.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that is something you can learn. I think you can learn that.
Yeah.
That's something I have to go through the training. And this is something I've gone through with almost all my students. Is
Yeah.
that whole training of like, okay, let's now draw a line under that. That's done. It's not the definitive answer. Is we have to move forward. But also, I think the thing that I wanted to emphasise was that I completely agree with you. You can learn that skill.
Well,
and secondly,
most people can, but not everybody.
most people can,
and
not everyone. Is that it's also very different from the skills that would have made you a good undergraduate.
Yeah, 100%.
The
coming top of your year
Yes.
doesn't mean that you're going to thrive at your
Yes.
PhD.
Absolutely. Yes. Being able to, learn a load of facts and put them onto the paper later on is not the same as being able to be motivated to construct your way through a difficult project that's facing challenges from left, right, and centre. That's the. In some senses, a PhD success isn't always about your spark of intelligence. It's about the perseverance to see it through to the end.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
And that's something that's going to come up in the interviews, but we'll come back to that later on. But
yeah, I do. It's slightly annoying though, isn't it? Though that the interviews process often does pick people who are top of their years, despite the fact that they might not always be the best suited to do the PhDs. It's quite difficult to distinguish those two things, I think. But yeah,
let's talk about related to motivation was funding. So you and I have basically been by default talking about securing a funded PhD position, but self-funded is an option. It's a difficult thing to talk about because some people can make a success of it. I, on the other hand, consider it as a really big risk, and I would generally advise people that you have to think very carefully if that's the right path for you, because you are then giving your own money to do it, which is also going to make a massive hit on your motivation to see it through.
So I think we need to distinguish here a little bit about what we mean by self-funded PhDs, because in the States I think this is quite different from the UK system. So what we have in the UK is we will typically, and I think this is probably fair to say this is true in Europe as well, is that typically a project will be advertised, and that project will either be attached to a piece of funding or there will be a broader funding scheme behind it of which that project is associated, with which that project is associated. And so you might be able to dip into that broader funding scheme. But what that funding does is it pays your tuition fees, which are substantial. It pays you a salary of a sort. I think we would prefer to call it a stipend rather than salary, because it's low,
legal implications,
and it has different so you don't have to pay. You don't get a pension certainly in the UK when you do this. You don't get enrolled in a pension scheme. You're not an employee of an organisation.
Indeed.
But it pays you a stipend, so that would typically cover your living costs and your rent and your food and stuff like that. And then it will usually come with some sort of research costs attached. So let's say, often up to about 8 or 9k in the UK, which will then allow you to go to some conferences and do some fieldwork or collect some data or whatever. So that is a funded PhD. Now, if you don't get funding to do your PhD, you have to pay all of those costs yourself out of your own pocket. And a PhD is a full-time job. I think it's important to treat I always treated my PhD as a 9-to-5 job. I didn't work in the evening during my PhD, and I didn't work at weekends. But I was I actually used to get in at 8, and I usually walked out the door at 5, and that was my day. But that's how you have to do it, basically. What you can't do, I don't think, very, very successfully. And some people have, and if you're doing it, then well done. But working a job at the same time as trying to do a PhD full time is going to be incredibly difficult, because ultimately you've got 2 full-time jobs.
It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I think in my experience, I haven't known anyone to successfully do that. But my experience isn't exhaustive. I've seen people try it, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And I should point out, that doesn't mean that you can't come to a PhD later on in life. In fact, a lot of my research group have ended up being people that have come to research a bit later than normal, not necessarily fresh out of PhD, fresh out of masters. They've often been teachers or research academics or journalists or whatever. That's all fine, but it's still 100% of their time when they come to it later on, rather than managing it alongside something else.
Yeah.
But I guess that was the question I was thinking about with the motivation, is that self-funding is if you're thinking, well, I've got this pot of money, it's a very tricky route and it's very hard. And also the bar to get into a PhD program if you're self-funding is much lower. A lot of universities might just take you and say, oh yes, well, lovely, well, you're paying. but that's inherently risky. I wouldn't recommend
Yeah.
it. Now, again, this varies from country to country. Like on the one end is Sweden, where I think it's almost treated like a job, right? You get maternity leave. I
Right.
think you do get. It might be not the case, but you might make those pension contributions. I don't know. On the
Right.
one hand, to another place where it's more like, okay, this is a grant, and you know how to do that piece of research, like in the US or wherever in the UK, where it might be this is a training event.
Well, often in the US, I think you can be enrolled into a graduate program,
Yes.
and that will be a much longer thing.
Yeah.
It might be 6 years or something. And as part of that, you actually have a teaching job,
Yeah.
and you're teaching. The money that you earn through teaching actually then basically goes and pays your fees. So you don't have to pay a tuition fee because you're earning money by teaching. And I think that's quite a common situation in the States.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm willing to be corrected. I've never been through a
I
PhD in
think
the
that
States,
is
but I
that
think
is the case.
I think there's a, so I think it's slightly different in the States. And my advice would be if you're interested in doing a PhD in the States, then get in touch with a supervisor who's advertising one and find out the details about that, because I don't think either Rob or I are really qualified to talk about it.
No, and it varies from institution to
Yeah.
state to state, I guess. But let's now skip ahead and let's assume that you found a PhD project that you want to apply for, and now you're putting your application. That was a preview of our latest bonus episode. You can find the full content on our Patreon.
The Fossil Files was created by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidman.
Fossil Files is a labour of love created in our spare time with no budget. So we really welcome any support you can provide us via our Patreon.
There you can access bonus content and join in the discussion by posting your own questions or even participate in live episodes.
In either case, we want to hear what you think. You can let us know what you thought about the topics we discussed or make suggestions for future papers in our social media channels.
You can find links to our Blue Sky, Instagram and YouTube channels on our website fossils.libsyn.com.